About parents who beat their child to death in the name of God. They believe the Bible requires them to spank their kids with items like belts and rods in order to train them to be well-behaved, happy kids. These parents appear to have been following the teachings of a Christian parenting book called To Train Up a Child, the book that is growing in popularity around the world. Gary Tuckman tonight has the first of our two-part special report.
The small town of Paradise, California, where these children lived with their parents in a fundamentalist Christian home. For the 9 children, life in paradise was anything but. We cover up 8 of their faces because they are the survivors. Survivors of a violent form of discipline practiced by their parents, Kevin and Elizabeth Schatz. The one face not covered is their 7-year-old adopted daughter, Lydia. She was killed by her parents. Mike Ramsey is the district attorney of Butte County in Northern California.
We've heard of, the phrase death by 1,000 lashes. That's basically what this was.
This is where the family used to live. The children's sandbox is still here. So was their slide and their treehouse. But the surviving children are now in foster homes, and the parents are in prison.
Violated Section 273A, parentheses B of the...
They've pleaded guilty to killing Lydia and seriously injuring her 11-year-old sister, Zariah, who almost died. Authorities say Kevin and Elizabeth Schatz beat their children regularly because they believe God wanted them to. The district attorney says the Schatz believed
to spare the rod will spoil the child, and if you can train your horse and you can train your dog, you can train your children.
7-year-old Lydia suffered terribly, supposedly in the name of God. But authorities say this was torture and murder by parents who were supposed to love and cherish their child. Inside this house, they found important evidence. The so-called biblical rods that the Schatz had inside. What they were 15-inch long plumbing supply tubes used to beat the children. And also important, a book was found inside. A book that appeared to light the fuse to the deadly brutality. The book is called To Train Up a Child. Its author is this man on the tractor, Michael Pearl, and his wife Debbie. They consider themselves observant Christians who run an organization called No Greater Joy Ministries from their Tennessee farm.
Well, I'm a preacher, minister of the gospel.
Their book and others they've written stacked in a warehouse on their farm. All of them guided, they say, by the teachings in the Bible.
And it says that if you spare the rod, you hate your child. But if you love him, you chasten him timely.
A rod, according to the Pearl's Manual on Training Children, could be anything from a tree switch to a spatula. In the book, they describe a rod as a magic wand. God would not have commanded parents to use the rod if it were not good for the child. The Pearls say parents should stay in control and not act in extreme, but they also declare any spanking to effectively reinforce instruction must cause pain.
Let's say a 7-year-old slugs his sister.
A 7-year-old would get 10 or 15 licks, and it would be a formal thing. In other words, you maintain your patient air, you explain to him that what he's done is violent, and that that's not acceptable in society, and it's not acceptable in our home. Then I would take him somewhere, like into his bedroom, and I would tell him I'm going to give him 15 licks.
With what?
Probably a belt. A kid that big, a boy, I'd probably use a belt. It'd be handy. I might use a wooden spoon or a piece of like plumbing supply line, a 1/4 inch in diameter, flexible enough
Something
to roll up.
Flexible.
See, what I'm saying here is, why not just use your hand instead of all these materials?
Hey, look here. Let's see. Right here. Let me show you something. Does that hurt?
Doesn't feel good.
But look what it's doing. Look what it's doing to your whole body. See your hip? You don't use your hand on somebody. That's a karate
But
chop.
you're telling me that when you use this material that it can't cause a permanent pain?
The skin.
My children never had marks left on them.
But look at the body of Zariah, the daughter who was seriously injured by her parents. These are just some of her wounds. Other wounds and bruises on her body, and on the body of her sister Lydia, who died, are far too graphic for us to show. Lydia was so severely beaten she died of a condition usually associated with earthquakes and bombings.
What do you think influenced the Schatzes to beat, terrorize, and torment their children like that?
The book by Mr. Pearl. There's no doubt about that.
Lydia was beaten for 7 continuous hours, interrupted by short prayer breaks on the day she died. The sound of the police siren was recorded by a Paradise police officer racing to the house. When he arrived, he tried to save Lydia with CPR, with both of the parents present.
She's swallowed a lot of vomit.
Figure out what's going on. She was like really tired, and her vision was blurry.
Come on, baby.
And listen later in the day to the seriously injured Zariah.
Where do you get splintered? Just on your arms and your back?
On my bottom and on my back last night, and underneath my feet.
Underneath your feet? Sorry, I'd like to take you to the hospital. Okay?
I probably need to bring a pot because I might throw up again.
At the sentencing hearing, 11-year-old Zariah, who was still recovering from her serious injuries, had the courage to address her parents in open court about her deceased sister. She said, "Why did you adopt her? To kill her?" It's a heartbreaking story. Kevin pleaded guilty to murder and torture and will be in jail for at least 22 years, and Elizabeth for at least 12.
Do you think if the Schatzes did not read the Pearl's book, there'd be a good chance that Lydia is still alive?
I would think that there would be.
We reviewed the case, and we tried to find out what had happened to see if there was going to be any blame pointed at us, and so we looked into it.
I was raised and I believe that the Bible is fact, so if something's going to collide with it, then it's obviously incorrect and false.
Not unlike the opaque windows of the Firstborn Baptist Church in Benson that let in very little light, 7 former members tell us there is a dark climate within these walls.
There's this culture of fear, and you have to obey the ultimate leader and authority, and it starts from the beginning.
32-year-old Cherith Robertson's family joined when she was 7.
It was taught, it was preached about that you break a child's spirit, and you do that by whatever means necessary.
Her little sister, Becca Faust, was just 5.
I knew that this is not normal. I didn't know what normal was.
The sisters say all the children attended school at church. They were told what to wear, what to believe, and were not allowed contact with outsiders.
Because you were ostracized from everyone else.
They say there were serious consequences for breaking the rules.
They would put me in a closet with the light out, and I would just sit there all day. I was allowed to eat once.
There was a lot of physical and mental abuse that went way beyond just spanking. So from spanking to beating, there was a huge paddle in the church school that I attended.
They say church members were publicly humiliated from the pulpit, and children were beaten so others could hear their screams. Robertson says it happened to her friend.
She was beaten and everybody in the school could hear it happening.
Robertson left the church at 18 and was disowned by her family.
They were encouraged to cut off all access with me.
Her family finally left too, and they were reunited.
I grew up with him. We were like siblings.
The sisters say they had to come forward when Sunday school teacher Jonathan Young was charged earlier this month with molesting 3 girls from the church, even though they never thought he would be the one arrested.
It was still like the worst thing in the world that you could hear because it's somebody that you cared about and loved and trusted.
The church's pastor, Kemp Young, who is the great uncle of the man charged, spoke to us shortly after his arrest.
I'm heartbroken by it all because it's unbelievable. And, the people, I hate anybody. If anybody's hurt, I hate that on any side. But the young man, of course, is ruined now. And I hate it, but I don't know what else to say, man.
Pastor Young declined our request for an interview to discuss these new accusations. He tells WRAL he refuses to dwell in negativity and that we are not getting credible feedback about what the church is really like. Both women say several of their peers confided over the years they had been molested by men at the church.
There has been a culture of covering up this kind of activity in that church since the 80s, at least, for decades.
They say the victims and their families were asked to leave, while the men stayed on in leadership roles, perpetuating the abuse.
If you look up the definition of cult in the dictionary, I'm pretty sure that the picture of this church would be right beside of it. It is definitely a cult.
I understand that it's hard in a cult. You don't see it until you're out of it.
It's not okay that children have been treated this way disrespected, mentally and physically abused for decades.
We warn our son that there are going to be many people who are not going to agree that God created this world in 6 literal days. They're going to tell him it's a fairy tale. He needs to have strong faith and believe God's word to be able to defend that later.
I absolutely believe that God had a controlling hand over my creation and over the creation of the earth and the creation of all things. And there's nothing that the secular world can say to shake that.
I was raised and I believe that the Bible is fact, so if something's gonna collide with it, then it's obviously incorrect and false.
I think sometimes our culture has like a overly heavy reliance on like science.
Christianity is more than science and scientific proof.
Have you guys ever been in a situation where you've been articulating your faith and it was met with mockery?
It should never surprise us that we're mocked or hated by the world. I mean, Christ said that this would happen, and it's happening, so.
I have to say, and I'm willing to say, you know, that the first 11 chapters of Genesis are true and correct because it's God's word. I was raised and I believe that the Bible is fact, so if something's gonna collide with it, then it's obviously incorrect and false.